To John, the animal was more than a wildling. It was his faithful companion. He had named him Rex, a large dog with mottled fur and piercing blue eyes that seemed to understand John's every word. The Calorians, while bemused by John's attachment to Rex, had no understanding of the connection humans shared with animals. For them, pets and companionships with creatures that lacked higher intelligence seemed like a strange human quirk. However, John wasn't concerned with what the Calorians thought. To him, Rex was his protector and, more importantly, his friend. One afternoon, as John and Rex set out for their daily patrol through the forest, John couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of unease. The Calorians had been unusually quiet the past few days, and John had heard whispers of an impending threat in their usually serene village. They had talked of tremors, subtle at first, coming from deep within the earth. Most of the villagers dismissed the concerns as typical seismic activity, but some, particularly the elders, had grown more anxious. John had asked Gial, one of the village leaders, about it, but had received little more than cryptic warnings to avoid the old places. That was the thing about Calorians. They had a way of saying things without really saying them. Vague, cautious, always in riddles. The old places likely referred to the ruins in the forest, remnants of a bygone era. John had explored some of them, documenting their architecture and noting their ancient carvings, but they hadn't revealed much in terms of danger. Still, there was an aura around them, an eerie sense that perhaps the Calorians knew something they weren't willing to share. As John trudged through the underbrush, Rex trotted ahead, his keen nose sniffing the air as if searching for some elusive prey. The sky above had grown darker than usual, the twin suns shrouded by thick clouds. The temperature dropped unexpectedly, and the usual chorus of forest creatures had fallen silent. The only sound that remained was the soft rustling of leaves underfoot and the occasional snap of a twig. Suddenly Rex froze, his entire body going rigid as his ears perked up. John stopped in his tracks, watching his companion with curiosity. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, gripping the rifle slung over his shoulder. Rex's nose twitched as he sniffed the air again, his growl low and menacing. Without warning, Rex darted forward into the dense foliage, barking furiously as he charged through the trees. John swore under his breath and sprinted after him, the underbrush whipping at his legs as he struggled to keep pace. He had never seen Rex act like this before. Whatever he had sensed, it was enough to send the usually calm dog into a frenzy. "Rex, Rex, wait!" John shouted, but the dog didn't slow down. The ground beneath John's feet seemed uneven, almost like it was shifting. A sudden tremor sent him stumbling, catching himself against a tree as the earth gave a slight rumble. He looked around, wide-eyed, wondering if this was what the Calorians had been whispering about. He pushed himself forward, determination fueling his chase as Rex's barking grew more frantic. When John finally caught up, he found himself at the edge of a steep cliff, staring down into a deep chasm that hadn't been there the last time he'd scouted this area. The ground had split open as if torn apart by some immense force, creating a jagged rift that stretched as far as John could see. At the edge of the abyss stood Rex, his fur bristling and his teeth growling down into the darkness below. John hurried to his side, his heart racing as he peered into the crevice. "Rex, what the hell are you doing?" "Come here, boy," he called, his voice strained. But Rex remained rooted in place, his body trembling with aggression as he faced whatever lay in the shadows. A deep rumbling growl echoed from the depths of the chasm, causing John to step back in alarm. His hand instinctively went to his rifle as he scanned the area, but the source of the noise wasn't immediately visible. The darkness within the crevice seemed to pulse as though alive, and John felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him. The ground trembled again, and this time it was no subtle shift. The tremor was violent, enough to send chunks of earth crumbling into the chasm. John could feel it, a presence, something ancient and terrifying awakening beneath them. The legends, the warnings from the Calorians, all came rushing back to him in a flood of panic. And then it emerged. At first it was just a claw, a massive obsidian black appendage that gripped the edge of the chasm with a sickening crunch. Then came another, followed by a long, coiled body that slithered out from the darkness. The creature's scales glistened with an unnatural sheen, reflecting the dim light in a way that made it seem both ethereal and nightmarish. It moved with a predatory grace, its long serpentine form twisting as it pulled itself from the depths of the earth. Its head, crowned with sharp, jagged horns, rose above the tree line, and its maw opened to reveal rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth. The Zarnak, John's blood ran cold. The creature, once thought to be a mere myth, was real, and it was now staring down at Rex, its yellow eyes glowing with hunger. The Calorian legend had spoken of an ancient beast that had once terrorized the land, sealed away in the depths of the earth by the ancestors. But now that seal had broken, and the beast had awoken. Rex, ever loyal, stood his ground, barking defiantly at the monstrous creature. But John knew better. There was no way Rex could stand a chance against something like this. Without thinking, John grabbed Rex by the collar, pulling him back as the Zarnak lunged forward, its jaws snapping shut just inches from where they had stood. "We need to move," John shouted, his voice hoarse with fear. Rex barked again but allowed John to drag him back. Together they ran as fast as they could, the ground trembling beneath them as the Zarnak pursued, its massive form crashing through the forest with terrifying speed. John's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced over his shoulder, watching in horror as the creature closed the distance between them. There was no way they could outrun it, not for long. They needed a plan, and fast. But in that moment, all John could think about was survival. As they fled deeper into the forest, the village loomed in the distance, its walls rising like a beacon of hope. But John knew that if the Zarnak reached the village, there would be no escape for anyone. He had to do something. He had to protect Rex and everyone else on this planet from the nightmare that was now hunting them. Chapter 2. The Beast Awakens. The rhythmic pounding of his heart in his ears was the only thing John could hear as he ran through the thick underbrush. Rex sprinting alongside him, keeping pace despite the terror that loomed behind them. Every breath felt like fire in his lungs, and every muscle in his legs screamed for relief, but John knew they couldn't stop, not now. Not with the Zarnak crashing through the forest like an unstoppable force of nature. The beast was faster than anything John had ever seen. Its sheer size alone would have made it seem lumbering, but the Zarnak moved with a terrifying agility, its long, snake-like body twisting through the trees as though it were made of smoke. Its massive head, crowned with sharp horns and glowing eyes, snapped at the air as it pursued its prey. John ducked beneath a low-hanging branch, narrowly avoiding a swipe from the beast's claws. The ground beneath him trembled with every step the Zarnak took, as if the very planet itself feared the creature's presence. "Rex, keep moving, boy," John shouted breathlessly as he pushed through a thicket of brambles. Rex barked in response, his eyes wide but determined as he followed his master without hesitation. They had to reach the village. It was their only hope. But even as that thought crossed John's mind, he knew it wouldn't be enough. The village's walls were strong, yes, but they weren't built to withstand something like this. Nothing on this planet or any planet was built to withstand the Zarnak. As they burst through the tree line, the village came into view, its tall, crystalline walls glimmering in the fading light. Calorians were already gathering at the gates, their faces etched with fear and confusion. They had heard the tremors, seen the destruction, but none of them had yet witnessed the horror that was chasing John and Rex. Without breaking stride, John sprinted toward the gates, shouting at the top of his lungs. "Open the gates now!" The Calorian guards, usually calm and composed, scrambled to obey. The gates creaked open just wide enough for John and Rex to slip through before slamming shut again. John collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath as he looked up at the village elder, Gial, who stood at the gates with a grim expression on his face. "It's awake," John managed between breaths. "The Zarnak, it's real." The elder's crystalline eyes narrowed as he gazed toward the forest, where the distant sound of the Zarnak's roars still echoed. He had known deep down that this day would come. The old stories had warned of the beast's return, but most had dismissed them as legend. Now the truth was undeniable. Gial turned to the assembled Calorians, his voice firm and commanding. "Prepare for evacuation. We cannot stay here." The beast will not stop until it has destroyed everything in its path. Panic rippled through the crowd, but the Calorians moved quickly, gathering supplies and ushering the young and elderly toward the central square. They had practiced for this, drilled for emergencies, but no amount of preparation could fully account for the terror that now gripped them. John rose to his feet, his legs still shaky. Rex pressed against his side, whining softly. The dog's loyalty was unshakable, even in the face of such overwhelming danger. Gial approached John, his face somber. "You have brought the beast to us, human, but you are not to blame. It would have awoken regardless. The fault lies with those who let the ancient seals weaken." John frowned. "The ancient seals?" Gial nodded, his gaze distant. "Long ago our ancestors fought the Jarnac and imprisoned it beneath the surface, using powerful seals to keep it contained. But the seals were never meant to last forever. Over time they weakened, and now the beast has escaped." John's mind raced. He had heard rumors of the ancient seals, but they had always been shrouded in mystery. The Calorians were notoriously secretive about their history, and even John's close relationship with the village had only revealed fragments of their past. "Is there any way to stop it?" John asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Gial was silent for a moment, then he nodded slowly. "There is a way, but it will not be easy. The beast must be lured back to the chasm from which it came, and the seals must be reforged. However, the process requires great sacrifice." John's stomach tightened at the word sacrifice. He glanced down at Rex, who was still trembling but alert, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the Jarnac. "What kind of sacrifice?" John asked quietly. Gial's expression hardened. "The one who lures the beast into the chasm must remain there. The seals will not hold unless the beast's presence is contained, and that can only be achieved by anchoring it to the living." John felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He understood what Gial was saying, even if the elder didn't speak the words directly. Someone would have to give their life to trap the beast, and John knew in his heart that it would have to be him. Chapter 3. The Price of Loyalty. The atmosphere in the Calorian village had changed dramatically. What had once been a peaceful, serene community was now a flurry of movement as the villagers packed their belongings, herding the young and the elderly toward the central square. The evacuation had been ordered, and no one questioned Gial's decision. The Jarnac was more than just a myth. It was a cataclysm, an unstoppable force that threatened to annihilate everything in its path. John stood by the gates, watching the preparations with a heavy heart. His mind was racing, trying to piece together a plan that might save the village, the people he had come to respect, and most importantly, Rex, his loyal companion. The Calorian elder's words still echoed in his mind. The beast must be lured back to the chasm, and the seals must be reforged. But that meant a sacrifice. A life had to be given to anchor the beast. John knew what he had to do. He had always been a man of action, someone who took responsibility when others faltered. His mission on Kaler had been to observe, to learn, and to report back to the human coalition. But now his mission was clear. He had to stop the Jarnac no matter the cost. Rex, ever by his side, nudged John's leg with his nose, sensing his master's unease. John knelt beside him, rubbing the dog's head affectionately. "You've been with me through thick and thin, buddy," he whispered. "But this time you're going to have to stay behind." Rex looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, his tail wagging slightly despite the tension in the air. He didn't understand the gravity of the situation. He only knew that his human was here, and as long as they were together, everything would be fine. John sighed, his heart aching. He didn't want to leave Rex behind, but he couldn't risk the dog's life in what was about to come. The Jarnac was too powerful, too dangerous. If he was going to lure it back to the chasm, he had to do it alone. Gial approached John, his face somber but resolute. "The preparations are nearly complete. We will begin the ritual as soon as you lure the beast back to the chasm." John nodded. "I understand. I'll lead it there. Just make sure the ritual works." The elder placed a hand on John's shoulder, his crystalline eyes reflecting the fading light of the twin suns. "You are brave, human, braver than many of our own. The bond you share with your companion. It is something we Calorians do not fully understand, But I can see its strength. John smiled weakly. It's not just about the bond, it's about doing what's right. Xiao nodded, then turned to leave, but before he did, he spoke one last time. When the time comes, your actions will not be forgotten. You will be honored among our people. As the elder walked away, John took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The weight of what was to come pressed down on him, but he couldn't afford to falter. He had to focus on the task ahead. The village had grown eerily quiet. The Calorians were huddled together, waiting for the signal to evacuate. The air was thick with tension, and the distant rumble of the Jarnak's movements could still be heard in the forest. John looked down at Rex again, his hand resting on the dog's head. "You stay here, boy," he said softly. "I need you to protect them." Rex whined, his ears drooping as if he understood what John was saying. The dog's loyalty was unshakable, and John knew that Rex would follow him anywhere if given the chance. But this time he had to be the one to protect Rex. With a final pat on the head, John rose to his feet and turned toward the forest. The Jarnak was out there, waiting. It was only a matter of time before it came for them, and John had to be ready. He grabbed his rifle, slinging it over his shoulder, and set off toward the chasm. His heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve was firm. He would face the beast head-on, and he would stop it no matter what. As he approached the chasm, the air grew colder, and the ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as though the planet itself was reacting to the presence of the ancient creature. The Jarnak's roars echoed through the trees, growing louder with each passing moment. John reached the edge of the chasm and looked down into the darkness. This was where the beast had come from, where it had been imprisoned for centuries. Now it was time to send it back. He could hear the Jarnak moving through the forest, its massive body slithering across the ground as it hunted its prey. John's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to be smart about this. He had to lure the beast close enough to the chasm without getting himself killed in the process. The Calorians would be ready. Xiao had promised that the ritual would work, but John had to give them enough time to complete it. He had to keep the Jarnak distracted, keep it focused on him. As the ground trembled beneath him, John took a deep breath and stepped forward, calling out into the forest. "Hey, over here, you ugly son of a—" The Jarnak's head snapped toward him, its glowing eyes narrowing as it spotted its target. With a deafening roar, the beast lunged forward, crashing through the trees with terrifying speed. John didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, his feet pounding against the earth as he sprinted along the edge of the chasm. The Jarnak was close behind, its massive jaws snapping at the air as it chased him. He could feel the heat of its breath on his back, the ground shaking with every step it took. But John didn't stop. He couldn't stop, not yet. Chapter 4, A Hero's Sacrifice. The air around the chasm crackled with energy, a low hum resonating through the forest as the Calorians gathered near the ancient ruins that overlooked the deep, jagged crevice. The Calorians' voices chanted in unison, their arms raised toward the sky as they began the ritual that would reseal the Jarnak within the earth. Xiao stood at the center of the circle, his voice the strongest, his eyes glowing with the power of the old magic that had been passed down through generations. The words they spoke were in the ancient Calorian tongue, incomprehensible to John, but he could feel the weight of their power. John stood at the edge of the chasm, Rex by his side, watching as the Jarnak slithered toward them. The beast's eyes burned with hatred, its massive horned head towering above the treetops as it closed in on its prey. Its scales shimmered in the fading light, an oily black that reflected the crimson hue of the setting suns. Every step it took sent tremors through the ground, and every roar shook the air with a force that rattled John's bones. John knew what he had to do. The plan was clear, and there was no turning back now. His heart raced in his chest, but his hands were steady as he tightened his grip on his rifle. He glanced down at Rex, who was still growling at the approaching beast, his fur bristling with tension. "Stay back, Rex," John whispered. "I need you to stay here. Don't follow me." Rex whined, his eyes pleading with his master, but John stood firm. He couldn't risk the dog's life, not when he was about to face something that could kill them both with a single swipe of its claws. The Jarnak was too powerful, too dangerous. John had to keep it away from Rex, away from the village, and lead it back into the chasm. The Kaelorian chants grew louder, filling the air with a palpable sense of urgency. John could feel the ground beneath his feet vibrating as the ritual began to take effect. The Kaelorians were calling upon the ancient magic of their ancestors, the same magic that had sealed the Zarnak away centuries ago. But the ritual needed time to work, and John had to give it to them. With one final glance at Rex, John took a deep breath and stepped forward, positioning himself at the very edge of the chasm. The Zarnak's glowing eyes locked onto him, its lips curling back to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Come on, you ugly bastard," John muttered under his breath, raising his rifle and taking aim. The Zarnak roared, its massive form coiling as it prepared to strike. John fired a shot, the bullet bouncing off the beast's thick scales with little effect. It was a distraction, nothing more. He didn't expect the rifle to do any real damage, but it had the desired effect. The Zarnak lunged forward, its jaws snapping at the air as it closed the distance between them. John's heart pounded in his chest as he backed away, careful to stay just out of reach. He had to time this perfectly. One wrong move, and the beast would tear him apart before he had a chance to lead it into the chasm. The Kaelorians' chanting reached a fever pitch, the air around them shimmering with energy as the ancient magic built to its climax. The ground trembled beneath John's feet, cracks forming along the edge of the chasm as the earth seemed to react to the power being unleashed. The Zarnak was almost upon him now, its jaws snapping at the air as it lunged again. John ducked, rolling to the side as the beast's massive head crashed into the ground where he had been standing just moments before. Dirt and debris flew into the air, but John didn't stop. He scrambled to his feet, moving toward the edge of the chasm, luring the Zarnak closer. "Come on, you ugly bastard," he shouted again, his voice hoarse with adrenaline. "You want me? Come and get me." The Zarnak roared in fury, its massive body coiling as it prepared to strike again. John could feel the heat of its breath on his skin, the sheer power of its presence bearing down on him like a tidal wave. But he didn't back down, he couldn't. With a final defiant shout, John leaped into the chasm, his body plummeting into the darkness below. The Zarnak, driven by its rage, followed without hesitation, its massive form disappearing into the abyss after him. For a moment there was silence. Then a blinding flash of light erupted from the chasm, and the ground shook with the force of the sealing magic. The Kaelorians' chants reached their crescendo, and the air crackled with energy as the ancient seals were reforged, trapping the Zarnak once again in its prison beneath the earth. When the light faded, the forest was still. Xiao lowered his arms, his voice quiet as the last words of the ritual were spoken. The Kaelorians stood in silence, their heads bowed in respect for the human who had given his life to save them. At the edge of the chasm, Rex sat, his ears drooping and his eyes fixed on the spot where his master had disappeared. He let out a low whine, his tail still for the first time since they had arrived on Kaler. John was gone, but his sacrifice would never be forgotten.